Today, we're unpacking a truly grueling 1840 journey from Liverpool to Sydney. We're going to explore the intense human drama and, honestly, the sheer raw willpower it took to cross the globe during the Age of Sail.
Imagine, just for a second, leaving absolutely everything you know behind to cross the planet, propelled by nothing but the human drive for a fresh start. You really have to ask yourself, would you do it? Because for the passengers of the ship called the Brothers, this wasn't some fun hypothetical. It was their waking reality. For half a year, they willingly chose to face immense physical and psychological trials, stepping completely away from their known world into absolute, terrifying uncertainty.
We're going to follow Alexander and Rachel Whittle, along with their infant daughter Elizabeth. Picture them stepping onto a Liverpool dock that smells heavily of tar, fish, and thick coal smoke. They had literally never seen the ocean before in their entire lives. They came down from a timber yard in Bolton, England, trading those familiar stone quays for the vast, measureless sea. And when Rachel actually looked at the ship that was supposed to carry them across the world, she noted that for what it had to do, it looked alarmingly small.
278. That is the staggering number of bounty immigrants crammed aboard this 500-ton sailing ship. Men, women, and children, carrying all their hopes and worldly possessions, stepping onto a vessel that was heavily loaded with cargo and humanity. They were part of this massive movement of people, 64 of them coming from Lancashire alone. And they were all packed into a wooden vessel that was actually smaller than most modern ferries.
Okay, let's totally burst that romantic illusion of sea travel right now. Down in the between decks, which is the space below the main deck and right above the cargo hold, the reality was incredibly grim. It was a dark, low-ceiling space smelling of sawdust and stale bilge water. Entire families were curtained off from complete strangers by nothing more than flimsy pieces of sailcloth. The Whittles were assigned to mess number 11, where they had to share meals, rations, and a tiny 6-by-4-foot wooden shelf. One passenger perfectly described it as living in a very long, thin house that was constantly moving. Now, to keep order and somehow fend off disease in those cramped quarters, the ship's surgeon superintendent, Dr. Gillespie, enforced a brutally strict barracks-like daily grind. Up at 6 a.m., clean your berth, scrub the deck, and then there were weekly musters where every single passenger had to present themselves. This routine was absolutely critical. In an era where scurvy and sudden fevers could wipe out an entire ship's hold, discipline wasn't just about keeping things tidy. It was literally a matter of life and death. When the ship hit the deep, famously nauseating swells of the Bay of Biscay, Rachel really showed her stoic nature. While Alexander, and honestly half the ship, spent 2 miserable days completely incapacitated in their berths by brutal seasickness, Rachel simply stated, "I decided not to be sick." I mean, how incredible is that? It just highlights the immense mental fortitude these immigrants had to summon. She even kept a close eye on their 15-month-old daughter, Elizabeth, who amazingly handled the rolling ship with the completely unbothered calm of a toddler. Surviving this journey definitely wasn't just a matter of logging miles. It meant enduring drastic climatic shifts over 6 agonizing months. From the freezing Atlantic Ocean, right through the scorching equator, down to the freezing Southern Ocean, and finally up to Australia. Every single phase of this route was a completely new test of their physical limits. By October, they were trapped in the doldrums. Imagine being stuck under the equatorial sun, the air barely moving at all, and the stifling heat turning the between decks into a boiling pot of sweat and tension. The sails hung completely slack. It got so incredibly hot that the deck planking burned bare feet, and the smell of unwashed bodies, mixed with salted pork, became almost unbearable. Dr. Gillespie actually had to double his rounds, desperately dispensing lime juice just to keep scurvy at bay, while everyone prayed for even a slight breeze. You know, that kind of extreme environment eventually breaks people. And by November 28th, tempers didn't just flare, they exploded. A loud, swaggering sailor named Blandford openly refused lawful orders. This escalated super fast into a really tense standoff in the dark amidships, with the rest of the starboard watch just folding their arms and refusing to help arrest him. The simmering tension of the whole voyage had finally sparked into an open rebellion, happening right above the passengers' heads.
Alexander actually went up on deck to see the commotion, maybe even to intervene. But the ship's captain, Thomas Greyburn, who was this compact, highly authoritative guy, impartially but very firmly sent him straight back down into the dark. The captain and his officers handled the situation with cold authority and threw Blandford in irons. But imagine being a passenger, lying in your dark wooden berth, listening to the heavy, angry boots stomping on the deck right above you, forced to ask yourself, are we actually safe on this ship?
Fortunately, the ship dropped anchor at the Cape of Good Hope on Christmas Eve. This provided a brief but incredibly beautiful respite.
Right under the shadow of Table Mountain, the Whittles were finally allowed ashore. They walked through this dizzying, colorful colonial settlement, indulging in the absolute luxury of fresh bread and sweet oranges after months of chewing on rock-hard ship's biscuits. For a brief moment, they could actually light a forbidden candle down in the between decks and celebrate surviving the first half of their epic journey.
But, as you might guess, that relief was incredibly short-lived. Feeling totally short-handed after a few desertions at the Cape, the crew point-blank refused to sail with passenger replacements. When Captain Grayburn gave the order to weigh anchor on January 6th, the response was just a terrifying silence. The crew completely refused. That standoff from November was back, but this time, it was a fully organized mutiny actively preventing the ship from going any further. The ship's log starkly details the absolute climax of this rebellion. The captain had to procure heavy irons from Cape Town, and 7 specific mutineers were chained around their middles, directly to the deck in the sweltering January heat. These guys had actually managed to break off their first set of irons and throw them overboard, so the captain had to secure them with heavy iron chains. It was a remarkably ugly, volatile, and deeply dangerous stalemate.
Faced with this terrifying situation, the crew, literally in chains, it was the passengers who had to step up. Men from timber yards and cotton mills were drafted by the officers. They were out there hauling incredibly heavy ropes and literally navigating the ship out of the bay themselves. Alexander and a young man named Croft had to learn complex shipwork on the fly out of pure necessity. They dragged the vessel far enough out to sea that the mutineers finally realized they had absolutely no escape, and they relented.
Once they got south of the Cape, the world changed completely. They caught what sailors call the Roaring Forties. These are fierce, totally unimpeded westerly gales that turn the ocean into a surging, urgent rush of gray-green, massive cresting seas. The ship didn't just sail anymore. It ran. It was the fastest possible route to Australia, but it came at the cost of intense, unrelenting violence, with huge waves sometimes rolling completely over the main deck.
For weeks on end, the between decks was battened down, pitch black, and tilted at a permanent 20 degrees. Trying to live life at this extreme angle was genuinely terrifying for the adults. The cooking coppers were swinging wildly on their gimbals, and just trying to sleep meant wedging yourself hard against the wooden hull so you wouldn't literally roll out of bed. But wonderfully, baby Elizabeth and the other toddlers actually found this to be a hilarious rolling game. Their laughter cut right through the roaring darkness of the Southern Ocean.
Amidst all that roaring darkness, the passengers experienced the profound extremes of the human condition. They mourned an elder, old Butterworth, who passed away quietly in his sleep. He was committed to the sea while the captain read words that the wind instantly tore away. But right there in that exact same tilted darkness, they celebrated new life. A baby boy named James was born right in the middle of a gale, delivered safely by the ever-competent Mrs. Critchley. It was this beautiful, stark reminder of the cycle of life constantly moving forward, even in the absolute middle of nowhere.
Finally, after nearly 6 grueling months, great gray-winged albatrosses guided them into Port Jackson. When they arrived on March 11th, the passengers flooded above deck to find a lush, green, entirely foreign world. Instead of the familiar gray English ports, they were staring at the vast, intricate beauty of Sydney Harbor with its painted blue waters and bright white buildings. The sheer relief and the overwhelming emotion of finally making it brought almost the entire ship to tears.
Looking out at those green hills and white buildings of their new home, with little Elizabeth sitting triumphantly on Alexander's shoulders, Rachel captured the immense weight and ultimate triumph of their decision perfectly. She just looked at the shore and said, "We chose it." It's just the perfect encapsulation, right? It was the ultimate acknowledgement that every single hardship, the sickness, the fear, the terrifying mutiny, the cramped quarters, all of it was simply the price of admission for this brand new beginning.
As the Whittles finally step off the brothers to build their new reality in Australia, it really leaves us with a provocative thought. Looking at the extremes they went through, the 6 months of darkness, the mutiny, the sheer physical toll, what would you be willing to endure to start your life over completely? It really makes you think about the absolute limits of human endurance when a better tomorrow is on the line. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and I hope it leaves you marveling at the incredible resilience of those who sailed headfirst into the unknown.